You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
There we go. This is
right.
why we don't use Skype anymore. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jasma. And joining me all the way in Portland, Maine, doing her best to keep your eyes open, it's Your Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Yeah, we're doing a little bit of a late night recording tonight for the old Reverend. I know I'm not technically the oldest. Actually, I'm the youngest one in the room of all of us in our virtual space tonight because I know Tim's older than me. So, yeah, but I'm doing well enough over here in the other Portland.
So to figure this out, how old are you, Tim?
I am 45.
Okay, you are older than me.
Yep.
Damn, everything. I'm the middle child.
Yeah, lucky my mother stopped at 2. We didn't need more of me out there, you know. But anyway, as you heard, folks, we do have a special guest with us here today. Someone who has been very active almost from the beginning on our Facebook group page. Why don't you introduce yourself to the folks at home?
I am John M. Nelson, MED. That's with a master's in education, about to be double master's in education. My undergrad is actually in criminal justice, in criminology.
Nice.
What really made me a nerd in criminal justice was living in the inner city.
That'll do it.
Living in the inner city.
Well, how did that come about? Was that at a very early age? Was it just witnessing what you saw outside, or did you have a love for law and order?
It started with in high school, watching a lot of my friends go into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, this is Parma. Can I cuss on here?
Oh, yeah.
Fuck yes.
I go, this is fucking bullshit.
Indeed. And yeah, what we are going to be talking about today is the criminal justice system. We're going to be talking about prison reform and stuff like that. Obviously, we're not going to be solving it within an hour here. So this is very much a cursory talk, but, we will do our best to make sure, whether it's on our website, our Reddit, or even in the show notes here, we'll have some information for you folks. We do have a subreddit, yes.
Oh, right. I am going to have to find it.
We'll
we should be better about sharing these things, to be also honest.
Well, I did add the Reddit link to our website. So if you've been to our website, it'll be on the list of addresses on your left.
Gotcha.
Yes, but yeah, I thought we would take some time to talk about that. A few weeks back on the group page, I did put an AP article, post an AP article up that was talking about a group in the Senate, a bipartisan group that is coming together to kind of examine the conditions in the prison system, the federal prison system in this country, to see what possible changes can be made. Because as the article in question states, the past few years especially have been really, really bad on the prison system, kind of like a lot of things during the pandemic. The pandemic kind of put a magnifying glass on the problems and exacerbated them in many, many ways. But I know you had mentioned, obviously you had mentioned at the start here, you had you study criminal justice, and obviously you've written a paper on that.
I've written quite a few papers, actually.
Well, there you go. Quite a few papers. Now, I'm sure, again, you've read through the article. Like, what are some of your first thoughts when you see that, I guess?
Usually when I see a lot of these articles and we're talking about criminal justice reform, a lot of it is we're going completely the wrong way. Mm-hmm. We're looking at our system and how can we fix it, rather than looking at the global system abroad and seeing what's working in our Western European allies, what's working in our Far Eastern allies' prisons, and what can we do to use their tactics to fix ours.
Yeah, I think back to the episode we did with Sheriff Ray Cyphers. He mentioned that, in the grand scheme of things, there aren't really that many evil people in the world. You just have a number of people that have made some mistakes, sometimes some major mistakes. But, for the longest time in this country, we've just had this policy of, unless you got a lot of money, you make one mistake, your life is fucked.
Well, I would actually say part of the problem was brought up in the book Unfair that I have shared and talked a little bit about, that we kind of have this kind of feeling in society that people choose to be bad and do bad things. And therefore, because you chose to do that bad thing, you should therefore be punished. And therefore, punishment is the answer. So punishment is what is needed. You have to punish. And if the punishment isn't working, you should punish harder. And so that's where we've gotten. That's even why we have kind of sometimes these cases where it seems like they apply like asinine levels of little bitty laws they broke. But it's all because they want to be able to stack and punish more. And that is traditionally where we've come from. But it's like an overall question of, is that the best thing for society? And that's even some of the stuff when we did talk to Ray Cyphers, he's tried to bring into the system in Texas is a little bit more of the reform mentality where he's sheriff. So it was really kind of cool to hear him talk about we can have classes and have things that maybe result in like a GED or like something to help build them up to success. And maybe we can get rid of this whole box thing, because I'm sure you're aware of ban the box and things like that. That's just all things that kind of go into the bigger topic of why this needs to be talked about and needs to be addressed, because it is a problem and it seems to have been birthed and grown big and strong by this idea that the answer is to just punish the shit out of people.
Well, it's ultimately, too, like I mentioned, punishing people that really can't fight back. Think about how many celebrities have done horrible things, like Vince Neil, lead singer of Motley Crue. In '84, I think he was driving high on cocaine, had somebody in the passenger seat, got into a car accident. That guy died. Didn't spend a day in jail. Keith Richards, late 70s in Toronto, was busted for heroin, yet the judge sentenced him to a benefit concert. When you're rich and powerful, you have a lot more options at your disposal to not really be punished.
You're exactly right. And people don't want to accept the fact that, yes, there are essentially two criminal justice systems here in the United States. One for those of us and those who are wealthy.
Yeah, as we record this, the past episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, kind of touched upon that even people that get shanghaied into a guilty plea and are able to, even after the fact, find evidence or something like that showing that they don't belong there, 9 times out of 10, it's still a major fight for them to get out.
It is. And unless you are essentially been condemned to death, the Innocence Project will not touch your case.
Yeah, and if there's one good thing that came out of the OJ thing, I guess it's the Innocence Project, because wasn't it Barry Scheck created the Innocence Project? He was part of OJ's team and whatnot. But what do you see are some of the major problems right now in the prison system? Like if you had the power to make some changes, what would be 3 to 5 things that you would change in order to see some positive results here?
First, I would decriminalize illicit drugs and reclassify it as a health epidemic.
Indeed. Why would that be?
Because we already have sociological and psychological evidence from Western Europe that, yes, when we treat them both as a medical epidemic, we see overdoses decrease. We see continued sobriety increase exponentially. And 2, we don't see the overcrowding in our prisons, especially here in Texas. We all know that, yes, we have a significant number of private prisons.
Yes. What would be another thing you would change?
Abolish private prisons.
Yeah, pretty.
That would be my second immediate one, right after the decriminalization of illicit drugs.
Yeah, because like it's weird that people think it's a good idea that a private enterprise should control something as important as a prison system, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're seeing this on the news as we speak. You know, a business at the end of the day is going to do what they can to protect their bottom line. And when you have private prison companies with lobbyists galore, you know, going to Washington to try, I mean, it's in their best interest to have these laws continue to stay in place, you know?
Yeah, and unfortunately, because it is a business, like it's kind of interesting and a bit shady. And I will say that this is not something that I have researched currently. I will throw that out there. But for a little while there, it was at least possible where these private prisons could have contracts that required the prisons to be filled to a certain percentage. And if it wasn't, the city would actually have to pay them. It's odd, right? Like that gives an odd incentive to want to put people in there. Like, right.
It gave the incentive so the statistic, the last time I checked, which was still pretty accurate a few years ago, was 4 out of 5 individuals in the United States within 5 years will commit recidivism and go back to prison. That is exceptionally concerning, especially when you have states like Texas and a majority southern states that use private prison contracts, and our federal government who does as well.
It creates like a revolving door, right? It gives no incentive to give any help to get back into society, right?
Exactly. All it does is it gives the incentive for the criminal justice system to put individuals right back into the system.
And there are times too to where, you know, even with young people, they will, you know, I don't believe somebody doing one thing, no matter how horrible that is, deserves them being in jail for the rest of their life. And I do have a personal story that I can relate to this, because I know somebody. Back in high school, my senior year of high school, I wrote and directed my own play. And before I go any further, for folks listening at home, I'm going to edit this story as much as I can, but it's not a lighthearted story here. So, you know, tread carefully. You may want to skip ahead a few minutes, but
we'll say trigger warning.
Trigger warning.
There we go.
Yes. And yeah, the star of my play, you know, I knew, was a friend. You know, I mean, he was more than acquaintance, but he wasn't like my best friend. If anything, I had to compare him to, it was like a work buddy. You know, it's like we shared some same social circles and all that. But like anybody, after high school, didn't hear about him until 2000. I was at work at a gas station, third shift. The newspaper came in, and he was on the front page of the newspaper. Ooh. He was being sentenced because when his son was born, he hurt his son in a major way. And his son ended up, like weeks after he was born, his son lived to the age of 2, but his son ultimately died. And the person I went to high school with, who was my friend, ended up getting a life sentence without a possibility of parole. However, recently, there was a Supreme Court ruling that stated that, you know, anybody in the country under the age of 18 that had a life sentence without a possibility of parole would have to have that changed. My friend was like 3 months to age 18 when he was sentenced. Okay. So he falls under that. And there was a news report on the local news in Grand Rapids detailing what was happening. Like what they're saying is that, you know, they're going to resentence him, and he could be sentenced up to a maximum of 60 years. But what the news did as well was they interviewed basically after the accident happened, the kids were put into foster care and were eventually adopted. They talked to the adopted mother, and the adopted mother has every right to hate that guy for the rest of her life. But in the end, it was just the news media putting this story on the air that, you know, again, had nothing to do with what the Supreme Court said. What the Supreme Court said was correct. I'm sorry. I don't care how severe anything anybody did. If you're under the age of 18, even if you did something severe, maybe you sacrifice your adult life primarily, but from an early age, because of that, I realized just how silly it was to keep people in a cage for the rest of their lives. Because again, most people aren't evil. Most people, there a lot of people will make a mistake, sometimes even a bad, horrific mistake like he did.
Yeah.
But it's like, I mean, you would have some people that may say, well, what if he does it again? Well, guess what? He'll be charged again, and he will be in for a lot longer after that. But to me, especially with younger people, it makes no sense keeping people in prison for the rest of their lives.
And it really doesn't. Even if they commit something as heinous as murder, there is absolutely no sensible reason to keep them behind in an 8x10 cell for their natural lives.
See, I don't know. I kind of have a little bit of mixed feelings about it. However, I will say that nobody deserves to be kept in our prison system as it is today. Now, are there people out there that legitimately cannot be rehabilitated?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Of course.
That does exist. A show that I really do love watching, Story of God with Morgan Freeman, where he just kind of takes you around and teaches you shit. He did an episode on what is evil and why does evil exist. And I really loved how he handled it, because he straight said, I don't want to give this guy any notoriety. So they didn't show the guy's face at all. But he straight asked him, it's like, if you could be let out today, like, would it be smart? And the guy, could very honestly say, no, because I can't fight the urge. Like, I've been let out before. I will do it again. And then they talked to a doctor that's worked closely with this man, and it was like raped, and I couldn't remember if he'd actually murdered the women, but I know he did very aggressively attack women, like it was a pattern, and he was back in jail. But there was a doctor that scanned his brain and actually was able to confirm that there's a part of it that doesn't work like most people's brains do. So in an odd way, a lot of times this is like some kind of weird birth defect, or possibly a TBI sustained from being abused, because very often people who do things like this come from abused homes. And I don't think we like to think of punishing people for a sick brain, right? Right. Because again, is that their fault? We don't like to think about that, but we won't talk about the fact that we can actually scientifically and medically look at people and kind of be able to have these honest conversations of, hey, we can't really put you back out in society, at least not yet, because who's to say what we could actually cure and remap, right? Look at some of the stuff they're doing with things like autism and the ability to remap parts of the brain.
Right.
With certain treatments. So it's just very interesting that I'm with you, but not in that sense, because I think until we can actually research it, yes, of course, there are logically some people that maybe not them get to go get an apartment and live like that.
And I think one of the best examples of this, he's not even here in the United States. That's Anders Breivik in Norway, who committed the Oslo mass shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's just an individual. I mean, four psychiatrists in Norway, and his prison psychologists have said, no, he does not need to be released.
Right. And I would be very curious if they did the same type of, where you can actually test medically for things now, right? Because
I would love to see if he would be, even if they did remap him and anything, I still believe that, the depravity of his crime, he needs to stay in prison.
Yeah, and if we're talking about something like multiple murders, I'm not gonna necessarily disagree with you on that. It's just, primarily the argument people give about why prison is important is that it's supposed to rehabilitate you at some point. But the fact of the matter is, people are not being rehabilitated. Budgets are being
Here, we don't use rehabilitative imprisonment. We use retributive imprisonment.
Exactly. And it's by the way, it's super easy. I've known very, very personally what that looks like once you're out. There are so many fees and then appointments you have to go to, and then those appointments cost money. And then if you have to do classes, because depending on whatever you did, you might have to do some type of reformative class, right?
Yes.
Well, then you have to pay for that too. But at the same time, depending on what you did, you might have to check a little box if you've been trying to get a job.
Yeah.
and it's really hard to get a job. So it becomes really clear, like, wow, even if you were trying your fucking best, even if that was the biggest wake up call of your goddamn life, like, there is not much going in favor
Very good.
of being able to actually, like,
Yeah.
even if you want to go to all the classes and want to make all the appointments, there's not a lot set in your favor for it. It's very sad.
Well, take into account too, like the mobile tracking devices they put on prisoners too. I mean, there are plenty of reports that the prisoners are made to pay for that, yet they can't, go off and get jobs. But like that would be, I mean, talking about some reforms here. I mean, I think one thing that the Reverend has brought up on many occasions on the show, as well as today, is ban the box. I mean, what are some other reforms you would like to see?
This might be a little controversial. If you are not familiar with the wording of the 13th Amendment.
The
Which
wording
one?
of what?
The wording of the 13th Amendment.
Okay.
I've got it up here. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whether the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. We need to reword that.
Yeah, that's Ava DuVernay made that documentary that that I believe you can watch free on YouTube, but it was on Netflix. I think it was called 13th, but detailing that and how essentially it's been a tool to essentially legally replace slavery.
Yes, and it's another method, along with, say, like the legalization of illicit drugs and private imprisonment to keep essentially individuals in prison.
Yeah, I mean, because as we talked about on previous episodes here too, I mean, it's the evidence is there that when the government goes after a particular drug, that particular drug is usually popular among poor people or minorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because we've discussed in previous years the discrepancy in sentencing between like cocaine and crack, even though they're essentially the same drug.
Yeah, correct. And that's just completely asinine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a lot of things. I don't think we could honestly sit here and cover all of the small things that really should be fixed, because something that I very recently kind of got into a little bit of a discussion personally with somebody was I personally don't agree with the death penalty. They've done studies on it. It typically costs more to run that than it does actually doing like a life imprisonment type situation for those people who maybe can't be put out back. Like, we've talked about very asinine crimes, things like that. But yeah, it came down to there's still a big misunderstanding on. I get so frustrated. There's like a lot of people who really feel like that you should just kill people. And it really just feeds into, but we all understand. Here we go. Sorry. So the big thing is we should kill them, right? If they did something really, really bad, they'll get dead sore. But my big problem is we do also have an awareness that our legal system seems to be largely influenced by how much money you have, right?
Definitely.
Like we just talked about how there's two kind of different systems. So if we're aware of that, and we've got cases like, there was that gentleman who spent like 25 years of his life in prison. I can't remember if it was in Texas or where it was. It was a story that totally caught my eye at one point. But the thing that really kind of grossed me out about it was that I guess the prosecution side did have access to DNA evidence like a long time ago, but because of the way like things are written here, they don't have to turn it in, right? Because you don't have to turn it in if it hurts your case if the other side didn't find it. So I'm super glad that guy didn't get the death penalty. He just spent his life in jail and then comes out. And there's like some really interesting shows that have, that follow people like after they've been in for a little while. And it really can be shocking depending on how long you've been in jail, because it's not like you have been like staying caught up with, what, like how social media works, like what kind of, how people are even booking travel or anything, like things as simple as that, like really changes in years. So this guy spent like his entire life in there. And if he had been given the death penalty, like you can't undo that. So that to me is like kind of one of the main reasons. Like not only is it ridiculously more expensive to run that, we also kind of know that there are issues with our system that is not ensuring that that guilty person is actually guilty. Right. And it seems kind of skewed to protect the lawyer's case more than it is to find justice, which I find oddly interesting about our justice system.
Well, that was actually touched upon on the latest episode of Last Week Tonight. I mean, they had video of the district attorney at like a state Supreme Court arguing that a death penalty sentence should still go through, even though there was evidence showing that the person was guilty, because basically undoing a guilty verdict would somehow hurt the system. I mean, the problem here is that, we do. A lot of the problem I see, too, is that I think the general public's focus, and I think Ray touched upon this as well, is really focusing in the wrong place. We shouldn't be focusing on the police as much as we should be focusing on the prosecutors that continue to put these asinine cases and are not looking to do what is right. They're only the bad ones are looking to protect their numbers only.
Exactly. Because especially with DAs, because that's how they get reelected. They're going to say, look how tough I am on crime. Look how tough I'm on crime.
Yeah, I'm actually looking. It was Texas, by the way. That story was a gentleman named Morton. And they did fight him on it. They, wanted to test DNA in 2005, and they kept blocking and blocking. The Williamson County District Attorney successfully blocked all requests for testing until 2010, when a Texas appeals court ordered that testing on a bandana take place. And they just decided this guy, killed his wife. And so they did finally let him out after being in jail. But yeah, it's that part of our system, I think, is probably one of the most frustrating, is that it's not really set for justice, right? Like when there's more laws that protect, I kind of get some of it, right?
Like an assembly line.
An assembly line for what?
It's the way, especially the county level prosecution works. It's almost like an assembly line.
The parts that are being made are the prisoners that are getting introduced into the system.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it doesn't matter as long as somebody gets found.
It doesn't matter if you're actually innocent or not.
Yeah, and it even kind of goes to how some cases, look at which was the bombing where the Good Samaritan cop, rent-a-cop guy actually got blamed.
That was the 96 Atlanta bombing.
Yeah, the guy that found it, they totally just wanted to pin it on him. They wanted it to be done. And it just seems like that type, and it's not just him, he's just like the kind of most famous one that I can think of. And even though they didn't really have any substantial proof that it was him, they really just wanted it to be him. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it seems to be a pattern in some of this stuff. And as it comes out later, that was the biggest problem, right? You don't find the true cause of something in anything. Apply this to random troubleshooting, even not in a crime, right? Like, you're not going to find the solution when you're biased to the answer. You're going to find it when you're actually trying to unbiasedly look at all the pieces and try to find what happened and went on. And it's it's not quite trained to be dealt with that way, right? People want an answer is the idea. And therefore the happiest we can make people is to give them some kind of person to say they did it. We caught them. We were successful. Haha. We have saved the day. We are your heroes. And you no longer have to worry about this person. And we're going to do our best to protect you from the next person. And it's that's so what they need to do. And that seems to be more of the focus than it is actually finding the truth.
And I find a solution to the issue.
Yeah, and I think one other problem here too, and I kind of highlighted it in the story I brought up, the news media. It doesn't help when you have my friend, my high school friend did a horrific thing, but why does his story need to be told on the news? I don't get it. And all that does too is just like the way it was presented too in the news piece. The big portion of the interview was talking to the adoptive parent, and that is a common news tactic that you have the victims interviewed. Yeah. And how dare they? And I believe me, I get the mentality of, wanting to see people that do bad be punished. But, we have to think about how this affects society as a whole. We are not thinking about that. And I think at the end of the day that it hurts us more, not only financially, but in a lot of other ways by not fixing this.
It does. Another way of it, like you said, it does hurt. It does hurt us financially. Just to revert back to what Reverend Tracy was talking about, we both agree that we're both vehemently anti-death penalty. I even go as far as they did a study in South Dakota on alternatives to the death penalty. They found by essentially eliminating the death penalty, they could save approximately $400,000 per prisoner per lifetime. Because of all of the legal costs it takes for appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal, because they can appeal for 20 plus years.
Yeah, and they do, especially if they really are innocent, which does happen sometimes. We'll go back into the whole, really, these appeals, don't be like, just innocent. Just don't fucking let them appeal anymore. Simple, right? No. That needs to happen because look at the times where we have to post-mortem go, hey, we stuck a needle in that person. And now, this evidence came out. Yeah, and it turns out
he's not actually the one who did it.
Right. And it's I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that is a statistic that we do have.
Yeah. And that's the thing here, too. Unless a person can absolutely positively guarantee that each and every person on death row is 100% guilty of their crimes, there should not be a death penalty because, one, people do fuck up, even under the best of intentions. Prosecutors, cops can fuck up. Two, we also know that there are bad people on the legal side of things. We have bad prosecutors. We have bad cops. We have, death is too final. Death is too final to just be so flippant with it. But you have something to say, Reverend.
Oh, I do. Just to add on to that list, don't forget there are also plenty of lawyers out there that do try to take these cases, as far as, publicly appointed, and they are so overloaded and overwhelmed, half the time they can't honestly represent to the best of what their abilities could be, just because they're completely just slaughtered with work, because they don't have the resources.
That's something definitely that we could do. Eventually, something we need to do nationally is find a better way to do the public defender system when these public defenders are doing 60, 70 cases essentially at any time. And when you do that many cases...
I was just going to say, I personally speculate how much lawyers should make for being defenders, but I have kind of a problem. I just kind of think it's really more of the privatized lawyer end of it that kind of ruins it, because even when you compare that to the public lawyer counterpart, these private lawyers have more resources, right? They have a secretary, they have an admin or whatever, they might even have an IT person, but most of the people that are working through the public sector that you would be assigned in that case where you can't afford a lawyer, which is insanely expensive, even for mundane crap, let alone rates are different. By the way, it's not a lawyer is a lawyer is a lawyer. A divorce attorney is going to cost different per hour than a you accidentally murdered somebody attorney. So that one's even worse. So when it is I think of, I have my own cousin who was in a frickin' drag race, and they both wanted to do the drag race, But the parents of the child who died in the drag race saw to it to go after my cousin, who then actually went and spent time in jail for that. Like, I do think that it's interesting how we deal with stuff on that level, because there was no intention to hurt that kid. They both did a thing. In my head, it would be like blaming anybody who died in like a NASCAR accident, like blaming somebody, you know what I mean, like in a NASCAR race, like that, you know, the person, you were next to the person, and it, you know, the person spun out and like had a horrible accident and died. Like, I don't get it. They both went into the race together. And so like there's also stuff like that I feel like gets missed. But I think that more goes to the you made a choice. Even though that choice wasn't to hurt somebody, but I still found it very odd that my cousin was dealt with to almost the same level as like that he saw somebody and like decided to ram them off the road. Right. You know, vehicular manslaughter being
versus doing it unintentionally versus somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to kill somebody today.
Right. Like, I have this urge in my brain and I am just going to ram this car into this person. Like, and it's just kind of interesting that almost in a sense we treat those the same. And I don't even know how to express, like, maybe that needs to be looked at. But that would be more of a law practice, like, area, I think, than anything. But it is interesting that we can't even, like, really separate, like, how we punish or choose to rehabilitate based on the intention of the crime.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, like a lot of arguments in this country, you know, people that, you know, like us that think that, you know, that people can be redeemable and whatnot. You know, when you do try to say that argument in public, you know, a lot of times you will get the whole, well, they did something wrong, they deserve it. And it's like, how can you fight that? That's the tough part. Like, how can you fight that ignorance? Because it's coming from a state of ignorance, and I've certainly been in that shoes too. It comes from ignorance because they don't have to deal with it. The moment they deal with it and see just how messed up the system is, it changes. Oh yeah, and then by that time, depending on how stupid of a mistake you made, you may not have the power to do anything, because if you get a felony, good luck voting.
Yep.
Yep, you don't get to anymore, you know, depending on how bad what you did was. Yeah. And it's like, it's just easy to get more compassionate once you've known somebody whose life has been touched by how fucked up the system is, because I've even had a roommate before that had a situation, and I won't go too far into it, but, you know, the long story short of it was he was found guilty on a technicality of having what turned out to be underage nude photos of a girl. Now, did he take those photos? No. They wound up in basically a party box, and he had no idea they were in there. And girl,
because he was in possession of it.
But because he was in possession of it, and he broke up with somebody who happened to notice this photo in the party box, and so she turned him in. And like literally, from what I understand, has never been able to get done with the whole thing because can never pass a polygraph test. Mostly because like this person doesn't find children attractive, so it's like
let's not get started on those because
right, like polygraph test. Oh yeah, don't even because
let's not get started on those because we'll tear them apart.
Like this is still a thing, even though so many people seem to know that polygraph tests aren't perfect. Like, see, another thing, this is like an ancient fucking tool that we still use, like it means something.
Stress test.
Funny enough, the inventor of the polygraph test, William Marston, I believe his name is, created Wonder Woman.
Really? Interesting.
So Wonder Woman and the worst test on the planet for determining guilt.
It's just a fancy stress test.
Yeah, and also too, funny enough, he was also polyamorous.
I've actually had to take one before.
Well, and it's funny because sociopaths will pass them because they don't react to stress.
I took mine from as I was getting into public safety.
No, it's just interesting because people like with the brain scan, right? So science that does work. Yeah. The brain scan, the people who would you could pick up with the brain scan that there's something not right there. Those are the same people that would pass those polygraph tests and be like, yeah, you're fine. You can go back out. You're great.
Brain scans are, yes, they're expensive, but they are far more accurate.
He seems like a good fellow. But, well, I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up here. I mean, like we said at the beginning, this is a topic that we can talk on and on about. And, you know, I'm sure at some point again, sometime soon, we will definitely do that.
Most definitely.
Yeah, but thank you very much for being on the show here, as well as being a great longtime supporter of the show on the Facebook group.
You're more than welcome.
Indeed. So, any last words, Reverend?
No, that's it for me. I think I'm ready for a nice long nap. I'm gonna think. I mean, what stinks is now this is the thing that's on my brain before I go to sleep. So I'm probably gonna have some fucking weird dreams or something.
And
Yeah.
I'll probably see some interesting mentions when I get up in the morning.
All my
Yeah.
Bitmojis.
Well, yeah, and for the folks at home, I mean, 9 o'clock at night for the Reverend is like 3 o'clock in the morning for most people. So the Reverend is
I
up
know.
really, really late.
Yes, I mean not really. This is normally when I would just be like actually trying to be
This is
asleep,
your wind
guys.
down
It's okay.
period.
Yes, it's my wind downsies time. I've got to be a good adult because that's what keeps the cortisol balance is like okay-ish enough in my brain so that I like staying around. So
Let's not get started on cortisol because we already know how high my cortisol levels are.
Well, on that note, we will wrap it up. Well, we thank you all for listening. Every Saturday, we're going to have something to entertain you folks in this podcast space. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Stay out of trouble, guys.
I will.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.